Imagine this. You're a seasoned cop on a quiet Monday morning shift. You've handled noise complaints, traffic stops, even the occasional petty theft, but nothing could prepare you for what you're about to find. Dispatch sends you out for what sounds like a standard welfare check. A neighbor's been concerned. They haven't seen the woman next door for days. No lights on. No movement. Just silence. You knock once.
Twice.
No answer. You try the door, and it creaks open. What you step into is not a home. It's not even a crime scene by typical standards. It's a nightmare. Blood smeared across the walls, an eerie silence hanging in the air, and the overwhelming stench of death that immediately tells you something is deeply, horrifically wrong. That's how it all began. And in the next few minutes, I'm taking you inside that very scene. Inside the minds of the officers who first walked in, the neighbors who started to suspect something wasn't right, and the secrets that this quiet suburban home was hiding. You came here looking for answers. Why this happened, who's behind it, and how no one saw it coming. Stick with me because by the end of this story, you'll have them. All of them. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a descent into the kind of darkness we like to believe only exists in movies or distant towns we'll never visit. But the terrifying truth? This could have happened next door to you. And it did happen, right in the heart of America, in a neighborhood where kids ride bikes and porch lights glow warmly at night. That's what makes this case so chilling. It's the contradiction between comfort and chaos, between what's visible to the world and what festers behind closed doors. And if you're like most of us, you're probably asking yourself, how does something like this go unnoticed? How does a seemingly ordinary life spiral into such unimaginable violence? That's what we're going to unravel together. Let's slow down for a moment and look at it from a human perspective. Imagine being one of those officers, walking into a scene you'll never be able to unsee. This isn't TV drama. There are no commercial breaks. The smell is real. The silence is deafening. And the worst part? The victims weren't strangers to this neighborhood. People waved to them at the mailbox. They walked their dog past your house. They had cookouts. You might have even shared a laugh with them once. But now they're gone. Brutally. Without a sound. That psychological disconnect between the world we think we know and the monsters hiding within it. That's the foundation of this case. And that's why this story matters. This is more than about crime. It's about how easily truth gets buried beneath politeness, fear, or willful ignorance. You're not just a viewer here. You're part of this investigation now. I want you to really think. Every choice these people made, every piece of evidence detectives uncovered, it all led to a horrifying truth that no one saw coming.
So, stay with me.
This video is not meant to shock you with blood and gore. It's meant to shake you mentally, emotionally, and maybe even make you look at your own life a little differently. That's why I need your full attention. This is about real people, real pain, and real evil. And by the time we reach the end, I promise you, you'll know exactly why this story couldn't be ignored, why the warning signs were missed, and why justice didn't come as easily as it should have. Now, let me introduce you to the first characters in this twisted story. Two patrol officers with over a decade of experience each. They'd seen a lot. Drug busts, domestic violence calls, even homicides. But this one shook them to their core. You'll hear how their calm professionalism cracked when they stepped inside that house. You'll learn what they found in the upstairs bedroom that made one of them physically sick. And you'll see how their first report, just 2 paragraphs long, triggered the involvement of specialized homicide detectives, forensic teams, and eventually, the media frenzy that engulfed the town. But this story isn't just about what was found. It's about what was hidden, and how a careful, quiet plan unraveled in the most horrifying way imaginable. Here's the twist, though. The person who called in the welfare check wasn't just a neighbor. It was someone with a lot more at stake. Someone who knew just enough to worry, but not enough to act, until it was too late. This call wasn't made out of routine. It was made out of fear. That fear will ripple through every moment of the story, and trust me, it's a detail that changes everything once you know who it really was and what they were hiding. So, I want you to lock in with me. Don't skip ahead. Don't scroll away. Because what happens next, The discovery in the basement, the chilling contents of a handwritten journal, and a single phone call that completely changes the direction of the case is something you'll never forget. This is where things go from terrifying to something far more sinister. And once I tell you what they found in that hidden crawl space, you'll understand why investigators say this is one of the most disturbing cases they've ever faced. But just before we go there, before I show you what truly turned this from a welfare check into a nationwide manhunt, I need to ask you something. Think about your neighbors. Do you really know what goes on behind their closed doors? Because in this story, the killer wasn't a stranger. He was someone everyone trusted. Someone who blended in so perfectly, he might still be walking free, if it weren't for one small detail he forgot to cover up. And what was that detail? That's where we pick up in the next part. And once I tell you what it is, you'll never look at your neighborhood the same way again. The woman at the center of this tragedy was 38-year-old Heather Lane, a single mother of two who had lived in that quiet, middle-class neighborhood for almost 6 years. To everyone on the block, she was warm, dependable, and full of life. Her house always had a seasonal wreath on the door, wind chimes on the porch, and the faint scent of cinnamon or lavender trailing from her windows. She volunteered at the elementary school, coached her daughter's soccer team, and even hosted the neighborhood watch meeting last spring. There was no indication, not even a whisper, that anything was wrong behind the walls of her meticulously kept home. That's what makes this entire case so unsettling. No arguments, no screaming in the night, no police reports, just a mother who seemed to be holding it all together until the day she vanished. And the moment police stepped inside, the illusion shattered like glass. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Heather's behavior had subtly shifted, though only those closest to her seemed to notice. Her best friend, a woman named Carla, who lived 2 streets over, told detectives that Heather had become withdrawn, distracted, even paranoid. She stopped answering her phone after 8 p.m. She canceled dinner plans, citing vague excuses about her work schedule or feeling under the weather. She also mentioned an incident with someone from her past, a name she never gave, but one that clearly rattled her enough to triple lock her doors and install a new security camera over her garage. Carla thought it was just stress. Heather had a high-pressure job at a local insurance firm and was trying to raise 2 kids with no help from their estranged father. But now, every little detail seemed to point to something far more sinister than a rough week or burnout. Detectives began piecing together her final known movements. She dropped her kids off at school on a Wednesday morning. Security footage from the school confirms that. She made a quick stop at a local convenience store, grabbed coffee, a protein bar, and a bottle of aspirin. Nothing unusual. But what happens after that becomes murky.
Her car was found in the driveway.
Her purse inside the house. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. It was as if she simply evaporated. The only unusual thing inside the home, aside from the blood and chaos, was a small, torn photograph hidden inside a kitchen drawer. It showed Heather with a man no one could immediately identify. They were laughing, clearly close. But the picture had been ripped directly down the middle, with the man's face just barely visible. Was he the reason for her fear? Was he someone from her past, come back into her life? Or was he something more recent, a secret she never told anyone about? When detectives spoke to her children, thankfully, they had been staying with their grandparents that week, they uncovered something even more puzzling. Her daughter, only 8, mentioned a strange man visiting the house late at night about 2 weeks before the incident. He never came inside.
Heather always met him at the end of the driveway.
They would talk in hushed tones, sometimes argue. But Heather never introduced him, never told the kids who he was. Just that he was someone from before. That was the exact phrase, someone from before. The problem is, when detectives ran background checks on everyone from Heather's known circle, no such man turned up. No exes. No coworkers. No disgruntled friends or stalkers. It was as if this man never existed, except in the memories of a scared little girl. And then there's the issue of her phone. Police found it powered off, tucked beneath her mattress. That's not where most people keep their phones, especially someone as organized and tech-savvy as Heather. Forensics later discovered that her phone had been wiped clean, text history gone, browsing data deleted, even her call logs had been scrubbed. Yet one thing remained, a single voice memo, saved automatically to the cloud before her phone was powered down. It was only 7 seconds long. Just the sound of Heather breathing heavily, whispering, "I think he's watching me again." No context. No name. Just that. And while it may seem like the clear clue pointing to the man in the driveway, investigators weren't ready to make that leap. Not yet. Because there were other pieces of this puzzle that didn't fit, and the deeper they dug, the more twisted it became. Take, for instance, her coworker, Dave Holbrook. On paper, he was just a colleague. But office gossip suggested otherwise. They were seen leaving work together frequently, grabbing drinks, laughing a little too closely at after-hours events. And Dave had a reputation, one that included an HR complaint filed by another woman 3 years earlier. Nothing that stuck, but enough to raise eyebrows. When questioned, Dave was cooperative, if a bit defensive. Claimed he hadn't seen Heather outside work in over a month. Said he didn't even know she was missing until he saw it on the local news. But his alibi?
Thin.
Said he was home alone that day, doing laundry and binge-watching a true crime series. No receipts. No witnesses. Just the word of a man whose connection to Heather may have been more personal than he let on. And then there's her ex-husband, Brian. A name that surfaced almost immediately in the investigation. The couple had divorced 4 years ago, and from all appearances, their relationship had been civil for the sake of the children. But divorce records show a history of financial disputes, custody battles, and at least one restraining order filed during the early months of their separation. Brian had moved out of state, started a new family, and claimed to have no contact with Heather beyond email conversations about their kids. But here's the kicker. Flight logs showed Brian flew into town just 5 days before Heather vanished. He told police he was in town for a business seminar. Said he never contacted Heather. Never even passed through her neighborhood. But when officers requested surveillance footage from the hotel he claimed to be staying at, there was no record of him ever checking in. Not that week. Not ever. The case was starting to spiral into something far more complex than anyone anticipated. 3 potential suspects, each with their own motive, their own missing pieces. And while any of them could be responsible, none of them seemed to leave a clear enough trail. Which brings us back to that crawl space. Hidden beneath the floorboards of Heather's bedroom, investigators discovered something disturbing: tattered fabric, a strand of long hair, and a set of fingerprints that didn't match anyone in the national database. But the most chilling detail? A crude message scrawled on the inside of one wooden beam. Just 5 words. She shouldn't have told anyone. What did Heather know? Who did she tell? And why did that truth get her killed? Or worse? The answers are there, buried beneath lies, hidden relationships, and secrets too dark to speak aloud. But don't worry, you're not just watching this story unfold. You're helping solve it. And in the next section, we're going to follow the forensic trail that finally led detectives to one critical clue, one mistake that blew the case wide open. But first, there's one more person you need to meet. Someone Heather trusted deeply. Someone no one suspected. And once their name enters the picture, everything you thought you knew about this case, it changes completely. You said. Just when detectives thought they were beginning to assemble a clearer picture of what happened to Heather Lane, something happened that knocked the investigation off balance. A crucial piece of evidence, a USB flash drive retrieved from Heather's home office, vanished without a trace. It had been logged into evidence, signed in by the forensics team, and marked for digital analysis. Heather had stashed it behind a row of books on child psychology, and investigators initially believed it might contain work-related files or encrypted messages. But then, just days before the scheduled deep dive into its contents, the drive disappeared from the evidence room. No cameras showed who removed it. No one on duty remembered seeing it last. It was as if someone with access, someone inside, didn't want that drive to ever be seen again. And for the first time, police were forced to consider that the threat wasn't just on the outside. The rot might have been creeping in from within. The loss of that drive wasn't just a setback, it was a warning. That's how Detective Rachel Moore saw it. She had been leading the investigation from day one, and although she kept a professional front, something about this case had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the quiet horror of Heather's final days, the idea that someone could live in fear, scream into silence, and still be invisible to everyone around her. Or maybe it was something more personal. Detective Moore wasn't just chasing a killer, she was chasing a ghost that felt far too familiar. Because years ago, before she ever joined the force, Rachel's own sister had disappeared under similar circumstances. No forced entry. No obvious signs of struggle. Just gone. The parallels haunted her, and whether she admitted it or not, this case was dredging up more than just memories. As she pushed deeper, Moore began to notice things others missed. Subtle inconsistencies in interviews. Nervous glances between people who should have had nothing to hide. And then there was the anonymous letter. It arrived folded neatly in a plain white envelope, left on the windshield of her car one morning. No fingerprints. No postmark. Just 7 words. Stop digging or she'll disappear again too. Moore didn't report it at first. She kept it to herself, unsure if it was just someone playing games or if the threat had real teeth. But then her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. Just her case files spread out across the kitchen table, each page neatly laid out as if someone had been reading through her thoughts. That was when she knew this wasn't just a murder case. It was a trap, one meant to be walked into blindly. Despite the fear building in the background, Moore kept pursuing the one thread that hadn't yet unraveled: Heather's childhood. She requested sealed juvenile records, tracked down names from old school yearbooks, and started asking hard questions in the small town Heather grew up in. That's when the real story started to shift. Because it turns out Heather Lane wasn't always Heather Lane. She had changed her name in her early 20s after moving to a different state. The reason? A family tragedy that was never fully explained. Her younger brother had died in what was officially ruled a drowning accident. But local whispers told a darker story. Some believed he'd been pushed. Others claimed Heather was there that day, and that she knew more than she ever told police. The case was closed quickly, but what if that past wasn't as buried as everyone believed? And then comes the twist no one expected. Carla, the same best friend who reported Heather missing, suddenly stopped cooperating with the investigation. She ignored calls, refused to answer her door, and wiped her social media clean overnight. When detectives finally got a hold of her, her entire demeanor had changed. The warm, helpful friend was now cold, defensive, and vague. Claimed she had nothing more to add, that she was done being involved. But why the sudden shift? Moore pulled Carla's phone records and found several late-night calls made to an unknown number, calls that lined up perfectly with the nights Heather reportedly met the mystery man in the driveway. Was Carla hiding something? Had she been the one to introduce Heather to whoever it was? Or worse, was she complicit in whatever had happened? Still, there's one thing that keeps coming back like a dark thread winding through every new detail: that torn photograph. The man's identity remains a mystery, but a forensic sketch artist worked from the partial image, and the results sent a chill through the entire department. The man bears a striking resemblance to a former FBI informant, one who vanished after a high-profile racketeering case over a decade ago. Could Heather have somehow crossed paths with a man living under a false identity? And if so, was he using her, or was she hiding him? Before Moore can investigate further, she receives a call in the middle of the night. A neighbor, an elderly woman who lived across the street from Heather, claims someone's been watching her house, standing on the lawn in the dark, just beyond the reach of her porch light. When officers respond, they find fresh footprints leading from the sidewalk to Heather's now vacant front steps. No one sees where they came from. No one knows who made them. But left behind, tucked into the mailbox, is another message. This time it reads, "You're looking in the wrong direction." And just like that, the case shifts again. Everything you thought you knew about Heather Lane, about the people she trusted and the life she built, it all begins to unravel, thread by thread. Because now there's a new player in the game, someone clever, someone watching, and someone who knows exactly how to twist the truth just enough to keep the detectives running in circles. What they find next will not only flip the investigation on its head, it will reveal a betrayal so deep it could destroy everything. And you won't believe who's been hiding the truth all along, you said. Just when investigators began to piece together the tangled web surrounding Heather Lane's disappearance, a new thread emerged, and it came from someone no one expected. Jake Turner, Heather's ex-husband, who had been living quietly 2 states over and was thought to be entirely uninvolved, reached out to the local authorities. He claimed he received a package at his doorstep, no return address, just a small box with a memory card inside. On it was a single video, time-stamped just days before Heather vanished. In the footage, Heather appears visibly distressed, recording herself in what looks like her home office. Her voice is hushed, urgent. She says she's being followed, that someone has been inside her house, and that if anything happens to her, it won't be an accident. But the part that truly chilled detectives was what she said next. She mentioned Jake by name. She warned that if they couldn't find her, they might go after him next. That they would make it look like something it wasn't. Her words, shaky and fragmented, suggested she believed the danger wasn't just about her. It was about anyone who might get too close to the truth. Jake had no idea why Heather would think he'd be in danger, or why she even believed she was being targeted. The two hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years, and by all accounts, their split had been amicable, quiet, mutual, and with no lingering hostility. But the sudden reappearance of Heather's voice, paired with the anonymous delivery, threw his world into chaos. As detectives scrambled to verify the video's authenticity, questions exploded in every direction. Was Heather paranoid, or had she been right all along? Was Jake truly in the clear, or had their shared past buried secrets that were only now surfacing? Then another blow. Carla, Heather's estranged best friend who'd abruptly stopped cooperating with police, was found unconscious in her apartment under suspicious circumstances. Pills scattered across the bathroom floor, a half-written note, and her phone left recording on the kitchen counter. But she hadn't overdosed. Toxicology reports later confirmed that she had been drugged with a rare sedative, not self-administered. The letters she was writing trailed off mid-sentence, beginning with the phrase, "There's something I never told anyone about Heather," but never finishing. It was clear someone wanted her silence to be permanent. Whether Carla had cracked under the pressure or someone had gotten to her first remained unknown, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just about a missing woman anymore. It was about a cover-up so intricate that it now involved threats, planted evidence, and deliberate attempts to silence anyone who got too close. The new evidence cast shadows on previously held beliefs. For instance, the digital footprint analysis from Heather's laptop revealed a strange pattern. Someone had remotely accessed her device weeks before her disappearance, browsing encrypted folders and deleting select emails. The IP address traced back not to an unknown hacker or random location, but to a law office in downtown Atlanta. One that had once represented Heather in a previous legal battle involving a nonprofit she'd helped expose for embezzlement. Was this coincidence? Or had Heather stumbled upon something bigger than anyone realized? Something worth killing for? To complicate things even further, Detective Rachel Moore received another tip, this time from an anonymous whistleblower claiming to have worked closely with Heather before she changed her name. The man wouldn't give his identity, but said he knew why she left her old life behind. He claimed Heather had been involved in a whistleblower program tied to federal corruption cases, and she'd been placed under informal witness protection, not because of legal mandates, but because the threats were considered too risky to escalate through formal channels. According to him, Heather had been living under a false identity to escape someone who had already eliminated other witnesses. The FBI had allegedly scrubbed her history to keep her safe, but now, that protection had run thin. This revelation upended everything. If Heather was running from someone connected to government corruption, then her disappearance wasn't a crime of passion or domestic violence. It was a targeted silencing. But here's where things take a darker turn. That same whistleblower sent another message, this time directed at Detective Moore herself. It read, "You're chasing the wrong man. The one pulling the strings is on your side of the badge." Suddenly, the investigation's direction flipped again. Had someone inside law enforcement been working to suppress the truth all along? Were the delays, the missing evidence, and the planted narratives part of a larger operation to ensure Heather stayed hidden forever? Now, every familiar face looked different. Every ally seemed like a potential traitor. The deeper Moore dug, the more it became clear that Heather's disappearance wasn't just an isolated event. It was part of a coordinated, strategic silencing of someone who knew too much. And the worst part? There were still names, files, and motives no one had uncovered. Someone was always a step ahead, watching, manipulating, cleaning up loose ends before they could unravel the bigger picture. As the truth grew murkier, one terrifying possibility came into focus. What if Heather Lane wasn't just a victim, but also a threat to someone powerful enough to rewrite the narrative? And what if her last recorded warning was more than a plea for help? It was a roadmap, a breadcrumb trail that would only make sense once it was too late. What happens next will upend everything you thought you understood about this case. The most trusted name in the investigation is about to be exposed, and not everyone will survive the fallout. You said. The shift came so fast, so brutally, that Detective Rachel Moore didn't even have time to process it. 1 minute she was combing through evidence files late into the night at the precinct. The next, she was staring down at her shattered car window, and a threatening message scrawled across the cracked windshield. Red paint, thick and dripping, covered the words, "Back off or you're next." The handwriting was sharp, erratic, as if the person behind it wanted her to feel the madness coursing through every letter. It wasn't just a scare tactic, it was a declaration. And it worked. Her pulse spiked. The parking lot was empty, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her back, cold and invasive. She turned slowly, her instincts screaming, but no one was there. Just the wind and a flickering streetlight casting fractured shadows that twisted across the pavement like ghosts. She didn't go home that night. The thought of walking into her apartment, of flipping on the lights and discovering someone waiting, paralyzed her. So she drove, no destination, just miles of highway and a churning storm inside her mind. What if she was in too deep? What if all the lines she thought she could safely cross were illusions? The memory of that anonymous warning, the one pulling the strings is on your side of the badge, kept looping in her head. Was she already compromised? Had she trusted someone she shouldn't have? She thought of her captain, of the detective in forensics who'd taken an unusual interest in her case, of the officer who had once casually mentioned Heather's name before it ever appeared in a report. Each of them suddenly felt like a piece on the wrong side of the board. But what shook her the most was what happened the next morning. She tried to reach Eli, her former partner, now a private investigator, the one person she truly trusted with the unfiltered details of the case. They had shared a bond forged in past cases and deeper scars, one she believed could withstand any storm. He'd been helping her off the books, digging into sealed federal files and backdoor law enforcement databases. But that day, Eli didn't answer his phone, or his texts, or his private line. When she drove to his place just outside the city, she found the door wide open, no signs of forced entry, but everything inside had been torn apart. Drawers pulled, hard drives missing, pictures off the walls. The couch was still warm, coffee half drunk on the counter. It was as if he'd vanished mid-thought. But what chilled her wasn't the mess, it was the absence of his dog. Eli never went anywhere without Max. That Labrador was like his shadow. And now both were gone. In that moment, something inside Rachel broke open. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was survival. Every instinct in her body screamed that the rules she thought she understood didn't apply. Not anymore. She was up against something far more calculated, far more dangerous than she had imagined. Someone was orchestrating this with precision, planting doubt, erasing threats. And now Eli had become another ghost in a growing line of victims tied to the Heather Lane mystery. But what scared her most wasn't just that someone had taken him. It was the possibility that Eli had finally found something. Something damning. Something that made his disappearance necessary. She returned to the precinct, hands shaking as she stared down at her laptop screen. In her inbox, a new message had appeared with no sender, no timestamp. Just a subject line. It's not just Heather. The body of the email was blank, except for a file attachment named Project Cardinal, Internal Review. She clicked it, expecting a virus, but what she saw instead made her blood run cold. Surveillance images.
Dozens of them.
Her. Eli. Heather.
Carla.
Even Jake. All in different locations, taken from angles only accessible through official government equipment. Street cams. Drone feeds. Aerial thermal snapshots. All time-stamped. All recent. Someone had been watching them for months. Tracking them like prey. Rachel staggered back from her desk, her breathing shallow. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a hunt. A methodical, calculated dismantling of anyone who touched this case. And she was the next target. Her mind raced, trying to remember what she might have missed, what clues she'd overlooked that could explain why this web of chaos had spun out from Heather's disappearance. But every time she tried to trace it back, the threads unraveled in too many directions. Had Heather been involved in something far more dangerous than even the whistleblower implied? Was she just a pawn? Or had she been the key to exposing something catastrophic? The paranoia bled into everything. Rachel stopped trusting her phone, began checking her car for trackers, refused to sleep more than a few hours at a time. Every time she heard a knock, a door creak, or even footsteps behind her, her heart thundered in her chest. And yet, despite all of it, one thought remained louder than the fear. She had to keep digging. Because whatever this was, whoever was orchestrating it, they were getting sloppy. Sloppier than someone with real power should be. And that meant one thing, they were afraid. But afraid of what? That question loomed, unanswered, as Rachel finally opened the full contents of the Project Cardinal file. Her eyes scanned a redacted document marked Top Secret across the top. The contents were fragmented, incomplete, but one phrase burned into her mind. Subject HL initiated unauthorized contact. Threat level elevated. Initiate Phase 3. Rachel's stomach dropped. HL, Heather Lane. And Phase 3? What had the first two phases entailed? And how many more were left? As Rachel stared at those words, a sudden flicker in the power caused her screen to go black. The office went silent, the hum of electricity dead. She looked up and saw a red light blinking outside her window. A laser. A scope. And just like that, the hunter made their presence known. You said. Rachel didn't breathe. She couldn't. The blinking red light outside her window was no mistake, no malfunction, no illusion crafted by her overworked mind. It was a threat, a very real one. Instinctively, she hit the floor, heart hammering, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The silence of the precinct was no longer a comfort but a cage. Somewhere out there, someone had eyes on her. Someone with a weapon, waiting. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the red light vanished. No sound. No shot. Just gone. As if whoever was behind it wanted her to know they could, not that they would. Not yet. It wasn't an execution, it was a warning. And that warning said, "You're close." She didn't waste time. She grabbed her gear and drove out of the city, taking back roads she hadn't traveled in years. Her mind was a tangle of questions, her thoughts looping around the implications of what she'd seen in that Project Cardinal file. Who had declared Heather Lane a threat? What agency would classify a missing woman that way? It didn't make sense, unless Heather hadn't just disappeared. Unless she'd been removed. The thought sickened her. It meant everything they'd been chasing wasn't about a missing person. It was about a cover-up. Something large enough that even law enforcement officers had to be silenced to protect it. Rachel drove toward the only person she had left who might know something, Carla Green, Heather's old roommate and once Rachel's best friend before the case drove a wedge between them. Carla had gone off-grid months ago, paranoid and skittish after someone broke into her apartment and left no trace. She'd accused Rachel of spying on her, of being part of them, but Rachel had chalked it up to stress. Now, she wasn't so sure. When she arrived at Carla's secluded cabin deep in the woods, she expected more paranoia, more confusion. What she got instead shattered everything. Carla didn't answer the door. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the trees behind Rachel before yanking her inside. She looked thinner, more exhausted than Rachel remembered. But her mind was clear. "You weren't supposed to find me," she said flatly. "I told you they're watching. They've always been watching." Rachel tried to explain, but Carla cut her off with something that made her stomach turn. "You think Heather was innocent? You think she ran?" "Rachel, she leaked classified data. She didn't stumble into something, she was part of it. She worked for them." For a long second, Rachel couldn't speak. She thought Carla was delusional again, caught in one of her conspiracy spirals. But Carla didn't blink. She showed Rachel a battered old USB drive that she claimed had been mailed to her anonymously after Heather disappeared. It contained encrypted messages, internal communications, files that referenced Heather by code name, Agent Lark, and detailed black ops programs hidden within private intelligence firms contracted by the government. Heather hadn't been a civilian. She had been deep cover. And according to the files, she'd gone rogue. Rachel's hands trembled as she scrolled through page after page. There were images of Rachel, too, surveillance from before the case even began. Not from the department. From whoever Heather had worked for. It was all connected. The file wasn't about Heather going missing. It was about Rachel being watched long before she ever took the case. Because she was part of the contingency plan. Because Heather had chosen her. "You were her fallback," Carla said quietly, voice almost apologetic. "Heather knew if things went sideways, you were the only one smart enough and stubborn enough to get to the truth. But the truth, Rachel, it's not what you think. You weren't investigating a disappearance. You were walking through a trap she set. And now you're not just a detective. You're a target." The air seemed to disappear from the room. Every memory of Heather, every lead Rachel had chased, every piece of the puzzle, it all felt manipulated now. As if Heather had been orchestrating the game from the start, using Rachel like a pawn. Had the welfare check been a setup? The carnage at the scene? The clues left behind? Had Heather planted all of it, anticipating Rachel's every move?
But why?
Carla offered only one answer. Because there's one more file. One that even I couldn't decrypt. Heather sent it out before she vanished. It was meant for you. She said it held the truth about everything, about her, about Project Cardinal, about what's coming. Rachel stared at the drive in her hand, the weight of it unbearable. If Heather had engineered all of this, if she had chosen Rachel not out of friendship but out of necessity, what did that say about what Rachel was now walking into? Every step she'd taken wasn't toward solving a crime. It was toward unearthing a secret so dangerous, even death was preferable to exposure. And if Heather had been right, they weren't even close to the end. As the night deepened and the cabin lights dimmed under blackout curtains, Rachel inserted the drive into her laptop. Carla stood behind her, arms crossed, barely breathing. The screen flickered to life, a single folder pulsing in the center labeled for RM. "Only when you're ready." Rachel clicked it, and what she saw changed everything. Rachel sat motionless, her eyes locked on the screen, where a single video file had just begun to play. The footage was grainy, obviously taken in secret, perhaps by a body cam or a surveillance device. It showed Heather in a dimly lit room, pacing, whispering frantically into what looked like a burner phone. She wasn't calm. She wasn't calculating. She was terrified. "They're on to me," she said, voice shaking. "I couldn't tell Rachel. She'll try to stop me, and I can't let that happen. She won't understand what I did, or why I had to do it." Then she looked into the lens, eyes wide, desperate. "If you're watching this, Rachel, I'm sorry. But I chose you because I knew you'd never give up, even when you should." Rachel paused the video, her breath shallow, heart racing. This wasn't just a message. It was a confession. It confirmed her worst fear. Heather had pulled her into this with full knowledge of the risks, knowing that Rachel's stubborn sense of duty would push her past the point of return. But it also made something else painfully clear. Heather didn't trust her enough to be honest from the beginning. The entire investigation, the trauma, the danger, it had all been a manipulation. Before she could digest what she'd just seen, her phone buzzed. A text message. No name. Just a number. And a photo. It showed her brother, Matt, tied up, gagged, and terrified in what looked like the back of a van. The message below it read, "Walk away, or he dies." The screen dimmed. Her stomach turned cold. Rachel hadn't spoken to Matt much in the past year. They had drifted since her obsession with the case began. He'd tried to warn her, tried to tell her she was losing herself. But she didn't listen. And now he was the leverage. The thing they knew would break her. She stood in Carla's cabin, staring at her phone, unsure whether to scream or collapse. Carla whispered, "You can't stop now. If you back down, everything she died for, everything you've done, it's all for nothing." But that was easy for Carla to say. She didn't have to choose between the truth and family. Rachel drove into town in a blur, torn between the rising panic for her brother's safety and the haunting images from Heather's video. She stopped in front of her old precinct, now a place that felt more foreign than familiar. It was there she made the decision to confront the one person she hoped was still clean, Detective Avery Marks, her former partner and closest friend in the department. He had kept his distance ever since the Lane case blew up, citing procedural conflicts and internal politics. But Rachel suspected more. She needed to know if he'd been playing both sides. She found him outside the building, smoking in the dark, his face weary and lined from sleepless nights. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I knew you'd come eventually," he muttered, flicking the cigarette away. "They said you'd be smart enough to stop. Guess they were wrong." Rachel stepped closer. "You knew about Heather. About Project Cardinal." Avery looked away, guilt etched in every line of his expression. "I didn't know everything, but enough to stay quiet. Enough to stay alive. And you should do the same." Her voice cracked, heavy with emotion. "They have Matt. My brother. If I keep going, he dies. If I stop, Heather's truth gets buried for good. So tell me, Avery, what would you do?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "There are some things you can't fix, Rachel. Some truths that don't deserve daylight. You dig too deep, they bury you with what you find. They will kill him, and then they'll kill you." It was the closest thing to a confession she was going to get. Rachel stepped back, heart torn, vision blurring. This wasn't just about Heather anymore. It was about systems designed to silence, about people paid to protect lies, about how truth itself had become a weapon. She had never felt so alone. That night, she received another message, this time a video feed. It showed Matt, awake now, eyes pleading. A distorted voice played over the footage. "This is your final warning. Return the drive. Forget what you saw. Or this becomes permanent." Then the screen went black. Rachel stood at a crossroads with no safe road ahead. She could abandon everything, sacrifice the truth to save her brother. Or she could expose the operation, the lies, the conspiracy, but at a price she might never forgive herself for paying. And as she stared at that blank screen, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what she chose, someone was going to bleed. Not out of malice, but out of desperation. And now Rachel was sitting in the middle of a game whose rules she didn't even understand. "You said." The moment Rachel stepped into the underground storage facility, she felt it in her bones. This wasn't just another detour in the mystery. This was the heart of it. The air was damp and heavy, the echo of her footsteps unsettling in the narrow corridor lined with rusted lockers and flickering lights. She followed the GPS coordinates from the anonymous message, praying it wasn't another trap. But when she opened locker 319, she found something that shattered any lingering illusion that this nightmare could be contained or understood with logic. Inside was a thick folder labeled Operation Silencer, stamped with government seals she didn't recognize and coded terminology that suggested military intelligence involvement. Pages and pages of names, faces, and files were jammed between surveillance photos, transcripts, and redacted reports, all pointing to one thing. This wasn't just about Heather, or Carla, or even Matt. This was a nationwide network of covert experiments, whistleblowers erased from existence, and the agencies designed to protect the truth now twisted into machines of silence. And there, on the fourth page, Rachel's own name. A file that detailed her past, her psychological profile, her relationships, her career, her weaknesses. She wasn't a threat to be neutralized. She was a pawn chosen years ago, monitored, manipulated, and nudged toward this very moment. Rage clawed at her throat. All this time, she thought she was chasing answers. But in truth, she was being watched, studied, her every move predicted. Even Heather's message, her death, Matt's kidnapping, it was all part of the same algorithm, part of a simulation meant to push her to the edge. Her instincts told her to run, to burn everything and disappear, but she needed help. She called Carla, who told her to meet immediately. There were things she hadn't told Rachel, things she couldn't say over the phone. They met in the parking lot of an abandoned diner off Route 4, where Carla was already pacing, her face pale, her hands shaking as she waved a flash drive in the air. "They're watching everyone," she said. "This goes way beyond us." Heather found out they were targeting kids, orphans, runaways, testing chemical exposure, psychological warfare. She tried to leak it. That's why they killed her. Rachel stared at her, stunned. "You knew this? You knew and didn't tell me?" Carla didn't answer fast enough. Rachel's stomach dropped. "You knew," she whispered. "And you waited."
Why?
Carla backed away, her eyes wide. "I had no choice. They threatened my sister. They said if I didn't feed them updates about you, where you were, what you found, they'd make her disappear like the others." Rachel couldn't breathe. "You've been feeding them info this entire time?" Carla looked like she was about to cry. "Not everything. I tried to mislead them when I could, but they were always a step ahead. I didn't know they had Matt. I swear, Rachel, I never wanted to hurt you." Betrayal burned like acid. Rachel stepped back, feeling the walls of trust she'd clung to collapsing in an instant. Carla had been her anchor, the one person she believed in. Now, she was just another link in the chain, another piece of a puzzle designed to break her. Before Rachel could respond, tires screeched in the distance. A black SUV rounded the corner fast, headlights off, accelerating toward them. Carla screamed, "Run!" as they both bolted behind the diner, the sound of gunfire tearing through the night. They dove into the woods, branches slashing at their skin, hearts pounding like war drums. The vehicle didn't follow, but Rachel knew it wasn't over. She and Carla crouched in the dark, catching their breath, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then Carla whispered, "There's more. There's one person, someone who started this. Someone you know." Rachel turned sharply.
Who?
Carla hesitated. "Avery. He's not just some disgruntled cop. He's the one who brought Heather into this. He recruited her, and he's been working with them since the beginning." Everything inside Rachel twisted. Avery had been her partner, her friend, the one who warned her off the case. Now it all made sense. Why he'd stayed silent. Why he looked so haunted. Why he never tried to help. He wasn't avoiding her to protect her. He was controlling the narrative. She remembered the last thing he said to her. "Some truths don't deserve daylight." Now, that line felt more like a threat than a warning. They weren't chasing a conspiracy anymore. They were inside one. And the people behind it weren't just ghosts in the system. They were colleagues, friends, people they trusted. The true scale of the operation was finally coming into view, and it was far worse than Rachel ever imagined. But the scariest part? She still had no idea who was actually in control. The night Rachel confronted Avery was colder than it should have been for early spring, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones and made your skin crawl. The abandoned medical facility on the outskirts of town looked like it hadn't seen life in decades, but the glow of a single floodlight over the entrance told her someone was expecting her. She gripped the flash drive Carla had given her tighter in her coat pocket, every muscle in her body screaming not to go inside. But this was it, the end of the line. All the dead ends, the lies, the betrayals, they had led here. And now it was time to get the answers she'd been bleeding for. She stepped through the broken glass doors into a long corridor, paint peeling from the walls, the hum of old power lines buzzing overhead. Her footsteps echoed down the hall, and then she saw him, Avery, waiting in the room they once used as an evidence lockup, standing beside a table stacked with old case files, syringes, and surveillance equipment. He looked older than she remembered, more worn down, as if the truth had been eating at him longer than she knew. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he motioned toward the chair across from him and said, almost kindly, "I knew you'd come." Rachel didn't sit. "Tell me everything. No more riddles, no more cryptic warnings. I want the truth. All of it." Avery nodded slowly, eyes heavy. It started with a program called Orion Directive. Years ago, after the attacks, certain government agencies authorized psychological research on trauma resilience, experiments designed to test responses under extreme stress. They used orphan children, veterans, whistleblowers, anyone they thought they could manipulate and disappear quietly. Heather found the files and tried to blow the whistle. But she didn't realize the people she was exposing weren't working alone. This wasn't just military or government. This was private contracts. Corporations funding black site operations for experimental tech, mind control, behavioral algorithms. And I helped build the system that kept it hidden. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "You helped them?" "I thought I was protecting people," Avery said, almost pleading. "But the deeper I got, the more I realized we were monsters pretending to be saviors. When Heather threatened to go public, they told me to deal with it. I refused. That's why they killed her. And when I found out they had you on the list, you tried to shut me up, too." "No," he said firmly. "I tried to protect you. I fed you pieces, hoping you'd back off before they saw you as a real threat. But once Carla came forward, once Matt disappeared, it was out of my hands. They decided to make an example of you." Rachel pulled the flash drive from her pocket and held it up. "This has everything. Names, dates, evidence. Enough to blow the entire operation wide open." Avery didn't move. "Then what are you waiting for?" Just then, the monitors on the back wall flickered to life. Surveillance footage showed different rooms, people in cages, doctors in hazmat suits, and one camera feed that made Rachel's blood run cold. It was Matt, alive, hooked up to some kind of machine, unresponsive but breathing. "You want the truth?" Avery said, standing slowly. "Then here it is. That drive is a kill switch. Upload it, and they destroy everything, including the facility he's in. They wipe the servers, bury the evidence, and vanish. But don't upload it, and they'll keep him alive as a test subject." It was the worst kind of choice. The kind that made your soul fracture. Save the one person left who mattered, or bring down a system that had destroyed countless others. Avery reached into his coat and slid a pistol across the table toward her. "I've done unforgivable things, Rachel. But you still have a chance to make this right. One way or another." Her hands trembled as she picked up the drive. She could feel every heartbeat echoing through her ribs, the weight of every decision she'd made crashing into this single moment. But before she could speak, the monitors blinked again. One final feed came online. A live camera feed from her apartment. There was Carla, tied to a chair, gagged, blood on her face. Rachel's scream caught in her throat. A voice came through the speaker, calm, mechanical, unfamiliar. "You're not the only one who can play games, Ms. Allen. Upload that drive, and we detonate the building she's in. You choose. Expose the truth, or save what little family you have left." The screen went black. The silence was deafening. Avery looked at her, stunned. "I didn't know they had Carla. I swear." But Rachel was done trusting anyone. She turned slowly to the bank of servers on the wall, inserted the drive. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every part of her was screaming. There had to be another way, another option. And then, through the silence, she heard it. A quiet ping. A second flash drive had been inserted remotely. Someone else was in the system. Rachel turned to Avery, but he was just as confused. Then a message appeared on the monitor. "You've gone far enough. I'll take it from here." Rachel stared at the screen, trying to process what just happened, when the servers began to hum louder. Files were being copied, downloaded somewhere off-site. The kill command was bypassed. Whoever was on the other end wasn't just a hacker. They were part of the system, and they were choosing to help.
But why?
And just as suddenly, all power in the facility shut down. Emergency lights blinked red. Doors slammed. Locks clicked. And Rachel realized she still had no idea who the real puppet master was. And they weren't done playing. You said. Weeks had passed since the lights went out in the facility, since the anonymous hacker hijacked the drive and saved Rachel from making an impossible choice. Authorities would later claim there was no record of what happened that night, no data logs, no surveillance footage, not even trace energy spikes that should have been detected when the servers were overridden. Officially, the facility had been empty for years, a relic of Cold War paranoia, deemed structurally unsound and sealed off by the state. But Rachel knew the truth. She'd walked those halls. She'd seen the monitors, the experiments, the lies stitched into years of silence. And even if no one else ever saw it, she carried it with her like a scar beneath the skin, hidden, but always there. Mao was rescued during a staged hospital fire across the border in Arizona. He didn't remember much, just flashes of white rooms and muffled voices. He barely recognized Rachel at first, but the moment their eyes locked, something shifted. There was still time to rebuild. He was broken but alive. Carla, too, was found unharmed, left in a hotel room miles from the facility, dazed but conscious, with a handwritten note beside her that read, "The first debt is paid." No fingerprints. No witnesses. Just silence where there should have been chaos. The people behind Orion Directive had vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only fragments and questions with no names attached. Rachel stayed quiet for a while. She went back to the basics. Long walks in the cold morning air, coffee that never seemed warm enough, nights where sleep came in shivers, and every door felt like it might be hiding something behind it. But she started writing again. Not for the agency, not for exposure. Just for herself. Pages filled with memories, with evidence, with names that may never be found in any official database. But she wrote them anyway. She needed the story to exist somewhere, even if no one ever read it. Because silence, she realized, is where darkness thrives. Months later, she received an encrypted message on a device she didn't remember owning. Just one line. "He's still alive. We're not finished." Attached was a single image, grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. Avery, walking through a crowded train station overseas. Not hiding. Not running. Watching. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel didn't feel fear. She felt clarity. This wasn't over. It never really was. The conspiracy hadn't collapsed. It had just adapted, slipped back beneath the surface like oil in water, waiting to strike again. But now she knew how to fight it. She had the tools. The proof. And most importantly, she wasn't alone. The last page of her journal read, "Truth doesn't die in silence. It waits. It watches. And one day, it speaks louder than fear." Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, like the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading into the night. Rachel closed her eyes, listening not to the chaos, but to the quiet that followed it. A calm unlike any she'd known before. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of cameras, headlines, or even whispers, a door creaked open in the dark. Someone else had started asking questions. And someone else was listening.